2, 3, 4. Let me tell you about PuckPedia, stats, contracts, and caps. It's all there for you. One-stop shop for your hockey information. It's a hockey sensation. So log on, log on, log on. If you give a puck, go to PuckPedia.com.
Cap Central. It is Thursday, January 15th. I'm your host, Keith Kavanaugh, alongside Hart Levine. Hart, how you doing on this Thursday?
Doing great. How about you?
I'm good. I'm excited. We had, good contract signings for us to talk about, some LTIR situations, a rant that you're super excited about that you've probably texted me about 10 to 15 times to make sure that it's on the rundown for this episode. So we're going to talk about the cap floors in a little bit. A good question, too, on RFA stuff. So I think just a lot of good stuff going on. A potential, quote unquote, mini trade deadline maybe that we have in a couple weeks coming up with the Olympic trade freeze. So I'm curious, do you think that we're going to see some action in the next couple weeks?
I think so. I mean, I don't think it's going to be as big as people hope, but I mean, we saw 2 trades like the night of the holiday trade freeze. So yeah, I think there'll be some trades. I mean, the dynamic is that teams that are buying, they probably want to make sure that their roster will make it healthy through the Olympics, and potentially the player they're trading for, maybe he's in the Olympics and they want him to be healthy. Also, if they're a team under the cap, they want to accrue some more cap space and be able to afford more after the Olympics. So that's a dynamic that's pushing it to maybe wait. But on the other hand, teams that are maybe trying to dump a player to create some space, like let's say the Oilers with Mangiapane, makes a lot of sense to potentially do that and get under the cap and accrue space over the Olympics. And other teams teams want to get their business done and have some files off their desk. And if their asking price gets met, kind of be done with it. So I think we'll see some action. I don't think it'll be, like a trade deadline as much, but I would be surprised if there's not at least a couple trades between now and the freeze.
Yeah, we'll see. I think Rasmus Anderson is one name that a lot of people are thinking the Flames have been a little aggressive and maybe want to do business before the Olympic break. Dougie Hamilton situation, I think Pierre LeBrun or one of the insiders had come out and said that they're going to try to move him before the Olympic break as well. So we'll see how all that plays out. And then one thing before we kind of get started too, I wanted to touch on, so you mentioned the Oilers, if they move Mangiapane to accrue cap space, but would they be accruing cap space if they're still in LTIR with Adam Henrique, or was it something that once they exit LTIR, then they'd accrue the cap space?
If they're still over the cap and using LTIR, not accruing space because you don't when you're in LTIR. But if they traded Mangiapane, that would send them under the cap. And so even though they would have a player on LTIR, they would still be accruing space that they could use while they're in LTIR or kind of build that up for later when they exit LTIR. The caveat is if you're in LTIR and you're under the cap to accrue space, it's actually not how much you're under the cap, it's how much you're under the cap number you had when you entered LTIR. But a team like Edmonton, I think they were within a few dollars of the cap when they set their pool, so it's pretty much all the accrual. But there's teams that they weren't kind of efficient with their LTIR capture, and so yeah, they don't get the full benefit of being under the cap, but pretty close to it.
Yeah, and I think that's one thing that maybe a general fan, and myself included, doesn't really understand between if you're on LTIR, you generally don't accrue cap space, but if you're actually under the number, then you are able to accrue. So
yeah, the way to say it would be if you're in LTIR and using LTIR, you don't accrue space. If you have a player on LTIR but you're not using LTIR because you're under the cap, then you can accrue some space.
Perfect. That's super helpful. And before we get started too, just don't forget to subscribe to the YouTube. We had a great episode with my pal Tyler Mataraz from Sirius XM NHL Network Radio. He told a great story about Wayne Gretzky. We talked Olympics. We talked topical NHL stuff. So a lot of good things in that interview. It's over on YouTube and a podcast app. So wherever you get your podcast, hit download, listen, subscribe. Great episode with Tyler. Let us get into the first topic of the day, and it is the St. Louis Blues. We had 2 contract extensions that I think were pretty noteworthy this past week. So the first is with the Blues. Philip Broberg signed a 6-year, $48 million contract $8 million average annual value, 7.7% of the salary cap. It takes him to UFA at age 31, expires in 2032. No clauses in the first 2 years because he is an RFA, then a full no trade clause in years 3 and 4, 20-team no trade clause in year 5, and then a 15-team no trade clause in year 6. If we look at the player, like, he's not going to be a guy that produces a ton of points for you, but he's a really, really solid defenseman. So he has 15 points in 46 games this year, but his underlying numbers are pretty good. He has a greater than 50% goal share and a greater than 50% expected goal share on a not so good St. Louis Blues team. And he does have the second most 5v5 minutes on the team behind only Colton Parayko. He's on their top penalty kill unit, doesn't really play too much power play. And he was named to Team Sweden, ironically, over Matthias Ekholm of the Edmonton Oilers. So just a funny little wrinkle there. Hart, what do you think about this deal for Philip Broberg?
I think it's a pretty reasonable deal from both sides. I think it has the potential to look really good for St. Louis. I think the one risk with Broberg has always been injuries, and I think it's a concussion right now. But how long does he play? But I mean, he's always shown the promise. I don't think the offense is ever going to be there to where you maybe would hope. Could be wrong. It looks like he's finally getting some power play time, but I think he's going to be one of those like really strong analytics defensemen who maybe puts up 25, 30, maybe 35 points in a good year, and is on your first or second pairing. And, I think as you go forward, like $8 million is definitely the going rate or a discount on that. I think what's really interesting is the term. If I was the agent, and I'm sure the agent felt the same way, like a shorter term would have been better. I think a 4-year deal would have been perfect because you'd get back to the market at 29. That's 2 RFA, 2 UFA years. The cap hit would be lower than the 8 that it was, but I don't think that much lower. Maybe still in the low 7s kind of thing. And then you're back in the market at 29. I think obviously the team wanted to have more security and not have to kind of potentially pay market price again in 4 years. And maybe the player too, considering what happened with the offer shading, it seems like he's found a good fit. Maybe he preferred some stability. So you could totally see why 6 was a good compromise. Like I'm sure the team wanted 8. I'm sure the agent was thinking 4. And then maybe just that negotiation got to 6, or even the player wanting that little bit of best of both worlds got to the 6th year. So to me, the term is the most interesting part.
Yeah, I agree there. And I don't think Doug Armstrong is done with his business. Like, I think part of it is locking up some younger pieces, but then, he's going to move out probably a good amount of players in the next, let's call it, month or so. Braden Shen seems to be the biggest name, is like the easiest guy to go just because of the position he plays and the leadership value. But guys like Jordan Kyrie's been on the trade block for, it seems like, years at this point. Robert Thomas, surprisingly, has been brought up in recent trade rumors. And I think a lot of teams should jump on a player like that if he does become available. A 1C who's basically a point per game player. I was just reading through what teams could use him a lot, but I think a team like the Boston Bruins would be a perfect fit for Bob Thomas. So I think it would be a lot that would have to come back in a return for that, but that'll be something interesting to watch with the St. Louis Blues over the next month or so.
Yeah, do they kind of blow it up and start for the real youth movement and try to get some good draft picks, or did they do what they've done in the past? Maybe they move a couple guys, but not touch the real core.
Yeah, and I think they just re-upped MacEwen to a small 1 year $850K deal, one-way deal. He's a young defenseman who they hope is a little bit better than what he's played this year. And then obviously they made that trade with Bolduc, and Bolduc's looked pretty decent for the Montreal Canadiens. And if you want to transition, I think that's a perfect transition. Let's go on to the Montreal Canadiens now. A guy who was actually terminated by the St. Louis Blues. So we have Alex Texier here. He signed a 2-year, $5 million contract with the Montreal Canadiens, a $2.5 million AAV, 2.4% of the cap hit, takes him to UFA at age 28. The reason this is interesting is because he was terminated this year. So he left some guaranteed money on the table. He was in the second year of a $2.1 million AAV deal. And then he ended up taking a 1-year, $1 million prorated deal with the Montreal Canadiens. This deal for the Canadiens offers, little risk, high upside kind of play, in my opinion. There's no trade clauses, no signing bonus. The base salary is a little bit more in year 1 than year 2. So maybe makes him a little more trade candidate if things don't go necessarily well for that second year. Teams will owe a little less cash than his cap hit. Like I said, he gave up a little guaranteed money this year with the termination. He only had 1 point in 8 games with St. Louis, but now he has 16 points in 25 games with Montreal. He's getting time on power play 1. I was watching the other night. He's in the flank position. He's just firing shots off. He's also he's playing line 1 right now with Cole Caulfield and Nick Suzuki. And who's to say if that lasts or not? But it's just kind of a whirlwind flip for what he was playing in St. Louis to now the role he's playing in Montreal, and to get a guy who's producing like that for $2.5 million, if he sustains it, seems like a no-brainer.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's just amazing what a difference 25 games makes, right? Like, he was on a $2.1 million cap hit, and if anybody wanted him, including Montreal, they could have obviously had him for future considerations, or maybe even had St. Louis add a pick if termination wasn't going to be on the table. Obviously, Montreal didn't value him at $2.1 million 25 games ago, right? So he bets on himself. He finds a good fit, goes there. And yeah, again, 25 games later, now not only is he worth 2.1, he's worth 2.5 for 2 future years, right? So it just shows you how things can really change in the NHL. I mean, we see it all the time. Guys sign contracts July 1st or in the summer, and then 20 games into the season, those are terrible contracts, and the team wants to get rid of them, right? So yeah, it's amazing how it can turn. But good example of betting on yourself, and that's his agent Dan Milstein now also did that with Zamula, right? Where get out of the contract, sign somewhere a bit cheaper, and try to rehabilitate the image and reputation, and then go sign a new contract. So let's see what happens with Zamula, and let's see if this is a blueprint for more guys to do this in the future.
Yeah, it seems like we mentioned last episode, it seems like this is happening more frequently this year than in other years. And it seems to work out so far for some of the players who have ended up doing that, whether they're getting production and adding value to future contract, or they're just in a better situation where they actually have a role on a team, like a David Kampf, who wasn't really playing at all in Toronto. And to me, I don't think Jeff Gordon and Kent Hughes are done by any stretch of the imagination. The Canadiens are in a playoff position. They're going to want to add their decor seems in a pretty good spot. So you imagine they're probably going to add around the margins on that forward group. They've been in the market for a 2 center for, however long they've been in the market for a 2C. I know Oliver Kapanen's kind of playing that role right now, but I think if they can find a spot to upgrade, I think they will.
Yeah. I mean, and again, if it's a good fit for both sides, don't mess with it. And like you said, it's pretty low risk, you'd think. I mean, having said that 2.1 that he had seemed like a bad contract. So, if in a year from now, is he going to terminate if it's not going well again? Probably not. But yeah, again, you could bury that, and about half or so would be kind of off your book. So it's certainly not going to kill you, and the term isn't going to kill you either.
Exactly, especially with the rising cap next year projected well over $100 million. Let us keep it moving here. So this is Hart's rant. I'm probably just going to let him kind of go. I'm just going to wind him up a little bit and let him go. So I'll set the stage, though. So last week when we were recording our show, 20 minutes after the show ended, the Blackhawks traded basically for Ryan Ellis's contract from the San Jose Sharks. So they added the $6.25 million net cap hit for the prorated for the rest of this season, and then for next season as well. It's got 1 more year on his 8-year deal. Pundits online were saying that it was a good move because it can get them to the cap floor for next season. They didn't have too much guaranteed salary space. But Hart wants to explain why that's not necessarily the best way to think about it, and why that's not the most efficient usage of cap dollars. So Hart, take it away.
So obviously teams have to get to the cap floor. Trading for a player to get you there, no problem with that. Makes sense. My issue is, or my beef, I guess, is teams being proactive. Yes, is being proactive about it. So we saw I started to get this burr in my saddle in the summer when we saw San Jose trade for both Carey Price and then Ryan Ellis. They didn't need both to get to the cap floor for this season. But the kind of talk out there was, well, they're going to trade players later in the year when they sell off, and so they'll need to make sure then that they don't have to worry about the floor at that point. Now we get to where Chicago is saying we're going to trade for Ellis again. Getting I think both Ellis trades was like a 4th round pick. So to take on these contracts, you're getting a 4th round pick. They're doing it again, not for this season, but for next season, because Ellis has a year remaining, because they want to have cap space for this dead contract instead of having to sign guys to these contracts just to hit the floor. My point is, why do you need to be so proactive? There are so many contracts that teams are desperate to get out of.
Andre Palat.
would love to move them. There's also other dead contracts. Ellis isn't the only one. I think if you called up Vegas late summer and you asked for Alex Pietrangelo, he'd probably be available, I think. There's a couple other guys that fit that bill. I mean, back to San Jose, Logan Couture, probably available next summer if you need. Torrey Krug with St. Louis, probably available. So maybe you do get a 4th-round pick to take one of those guys, but I just don't get why you need to do it now, because maybe one of those teams would be actually more desperate to move one of them. Or you look at all the players right now that have bad contracts. You mentioned Andre Palat, for example, right? Like what could you get for them at the deadline if New Jersey really needed to make a trade? They were closer, they were a contender or closer to the playoff line, and there was a move they really wanted to make. But the only way to do it is to ditch Palat. Like, could you get a better pick, right? Let's look many years back, but Toronto made a 1st-round pick. Thank you for Patrick Marleau. A 1st-round pick.
I knew where you were going.
A 1st-round pick because Toronto was stuck and they needed to move that money off. Well, now Chicago, of course, they could still do that, but maybe it's a bigger contract, or maybe there's other opportunities. Again, not to say they shouldn't take Ryan Ellis for a 4th-round pick. My point is, why do it now so proactively? So that's my gripe, is the teams that are worried about the cap floor are making moves proactively. I look at next season's cap numbers. Pittsburgh only has $52 million committed with 15 guys, and they may end up moving guys out this year. You don't see them making moves like this because I think that they're savvy enough to see that. We have lots of time. We have all summer. We don't have to be compliant with the floor until the start of the season. Who knows who they might sign, or what teams may be desperate to move contracts. And so now you have maximum flexibility to have that available. And again, I mentioned the few sort of dead contracts that we know of right now. We still have half a season to play, Olympics, playoffs. There could be additional guys that are going to basically have career-ending injuries that could be a dead contract available. So the end of my rant is no problem with making a move to get to the floor, but I don't see the advantage of being so proactive about it. Why not wait and see if you can get more assets or take advantage of teams that are desperate?
There's also I mean, it was a great rant. I think it was a great rant. I think it makes a lot of sense with what you're saying. And to your point too, like there's also guys that are just available every year, that not the LTIR island guys, those guys that are never playing a hockey game again, whose contracts get moved. But look at a guy like Jack Roslovic, for example, right? He held out because at the start of free agency, he wasn't getting, a term deal that was suitable to his liking. So he ended up signing that deal in Edmonton. Let's say Pittsburgh needs to get to the cap floor and they're like $5 million away. Why would they not just give Jack Roslovic $5 million on a 1-year deal and get there and then have a solid player, and then you flip them at the deadline, you retain half of that salary, and then you end up returning assets for that later on? And I think something like that is another option that teams maybe want to use. And to your point, like there's no need to do that right then and there. Like they can wait on it. And there's going to be plenty of guys available to do that with.
The argument I saw against that, and let's give fair time, was that Chicago didn't want to take up
for a young
the
guy,
depth
right?
chart with players to push a young guy out. That's a fair point. But again, there'll be other LTIR island type contracts or dead contracts available. Or if it's a team is desperate to move and you don't want him to use a spot, okay, trade for him and then waive him and send him to the minors, for example, and or trade for him and maybe you scratch him and that doesn't fit. Like there's other ways out of it other than having to sign a player and use a lineup roster spot.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah, we'll see what happens, but there's going to be a lot of moves like that over the summer. And are you surprised that the new CBA didn't necessarily outlaw some of these deals or for contracts with guys who are clearly not going to play another NHL game again, and their contracts are just moved as part of these quote unquote paper transactions to get different teams on the cap floor?
No, I don't think they should be outlawed because, I mean, a team signs the contract, expecting the player to play. And if they get injured and they're out, I mean, why should they be stuck with that for the rest of the contract just because now they're injured? I mean, I think if two willing parties can make it a deal that benefits both, I think that's all fair. I think we'll see a lot less of them. I mean, a lot of the ones we saw previously like that were prior to the 8-year limit when we had like the Shea Weber contract and these really long ones. Now with the limits going down to 6 and 7 years, I mean, we'll just see less of it, or less contracts that have less time. The other thing too is that with the restrictions on the signing bonuses and the variability between contracts, most importantly, contracts can't be front loaded as much as they previously have. And that's why like a guy like Carey Price was so attractive. He had $1 million salary with a $10.5 million cap hit. You know, a guy that has a $8 million cap hit and a $7 million salary, you know, if he's insured, I mean, sure, that helps. But there's still some money out of pocket. I think the insurance is like 80% typically. So there's still like, the team is going to be out of pocket for it. And some of these guys that have had other injuries or the team didn't insure aren't insured. So I think it's going to be harder to move those contracts going forward than it has been, because there'll just be less of those types of contracts available.
Exactly, like less, like high cap hits, but low amount of money that the new acquiring team would actually owe. We just got a good question on YouTube. Actually, first off, he wants to know, he has multiple questions regarding the Oilers and their cap, JJHB5CH. So why don't we just dive right into our next topic, and that is the Edmonton Oilers salary cap situation. So Hart had a tweet on PuckPedia the other day. So basically, Jake Walman and Tristan Jarry were both ready to be activated and play into the Oilers lineup. They were both on LTIR. So Jake Walman carried a $3.4 million LTIR and cap hit. And then Tristan Jarry makes more than the allowed this year under the CBA. So he was on LTIR for $3.82 million. So what the Oilers did there is they added Adam Henrique to LTIR, which is $3 million. They activated Walman and Jarry off LTIR. And then that gave them $271K in cap space remaining in LTIR. They will essentially need a little over $2 million in space if they want to activate Adam Henrique whenever he becomes healthy. And then now an interesting wrinkle too is Connor Ingram. He's the third goalie kind of on their roster now. He will actually need waivers to get sent down if he's on the roster for, I think at this point, 3 more days. So we're going to maybe see a move where Connor Ingram gets sent down to the minors. But if he does get sent down now, the next time he gets called up, it's not like that 30-day resets. It's cumulative. So if he's on the roster for 2 more days after the second call up, then he'll be required for waivers.
Yeah, you nailed it all. So, I think that one takeaway is teams are often, there's a concern, like how will this team be cap compliant when the guys get healthy? We looked at that with New Jersey with Kovacevic, and who else was hurt, got injured or
Noesen.
activated at the same time. Yeah.
Someone
got activated at the same
Dadonov.
Dadonov got activated at the same time. We saw with the Oilers with Jarry and Walman, what's going to happen when they get activated. Often there's another injury. I mean, that's the simplest thing to think about is like, and again, my rant about being so proactive, like sometimes teams are so worried what's going to happen when everyone's healthy. That doesn't happen that often. So, New Jersey, it was, Noesen and MacEwen went on LTIR.
It almost did, and then it didn't, right? Like Kovacevic was just getting back to be healthy. And then out of nowhere, like no one even really knew Noesen was like going through this nagging injury that needed knee surgery. And then all of a sudden it kind of just happened. And you're like, well, that was a little convenient.
Yeah. And Edmonton with Henrique, right? So, so that's the thing is that in other injuries can pop up, but the team does need to have a plan. Like what would we do if everyone was healthy? And so with Edmonton, like you mentioned, they'd have to clear just over 2 million if everyone was healthy. And they have 23 active guys. So you add Henrique, that puts you to 24, right? And so, that's basically sending 3 cheap guys or 2 expensive guys down, and you'd have a 21 to 22 man roster. So it's very doable. It's not like, I saw some comments like they have to trade Mangiapane just to activate everybody. Like, no, they're within the space where they could send guys down. New Jersey, if you want to move to New Jersey.
Yeah, we can go to Devils too. So basically,
it's a little
I'll
tighter.
go over their situation quick first. Yeah. So basically what New Jersey did is they added Stefan Noesen at $2.75 million and Zack MacEwen $775,000 to LTIR. MacEwen's already been ruled out for the season. And then Noesen is probably done for the season. They don't know for sure, but it's definitely not going to be a short-term injury. Then they activated Kovacevic, who carried that $3.82 million LTIR cap hit, and then Dadonov, who is on LTIR with $1 million. So they now have $270,000 in space remaining in LTIR. They're also trying to move out, Dougie Hamilton and Andre Palat, who have a combined cap hit of $15 million.
Yeah, so actually same as Edmonton, 270,000 a space. It's kind of like the magic number. But yeah, so like if Noesen and MacEwen are out for the year, like assuming no other injuries, like they're fine, right? And obviously that doesn't give them room to acquire anybody, but they have 23 players on that as well. So, you could, if they wanted to add a couple million cap hit in trade, they could send some guys down or move them out as part of it. So, again, they're kind of fine from a cap perspective, assuming those guys are out for the year. And even if, let's say, Noesen does come back before the end of the year, that's 2.75. I mean, that's
You're carrying 8 defensemen right now too.
Exactly. You could send that down. I mean, if you're talking about like a 775 guy, that's 3 or 4 guys. And if you have 24, 25 potentially healthy players, you can get down to like the minimum is the 20. So yeah, I think with New Jersey, it's more about if they want to add something, that's where they're going to have to make some moves. Or if Noesen is maybe going to make it back before the end of the season. So that's where you look at like a Palat and a Hamilton are the obvious ones because of their cap hit. The question will be, is New Jersey willing to retain? Like they haven't used any of their retention spots. So they have all 3 remaining. Teams are typically reluctant to retain, when there's many years left. So that's why maybe like Palat, he's only got 1 year left.
Dougie
But Hamilton, I mean, it's 2, but it's potentially a big number because I don't think, I typically don't think it's worth using a retention spot for like a small amount of money. You might as well, like Nashville's retaining on Ekholm for $250,000 a year. That doesn't really seem worth like the retention spot, right? Like if you're going to get a better asset out of the trade by retaining more, it's kind of my perspective on it.
Yeah, like what better asset are you going to get if we're retaining just $250,000? Like maybe they need it too just for the salary cap to work that year, but like that's pretty much nothing.
Yeah, exactly.
And to your point too, yeah, obviously I texted Fitzy to let him know he's doing a great job. The media's coming for his neck. It's brutal out there. Dougie looks great. Gave him 1 scratch, and then he looks great. He looks like the next coming of Jesus Christ. And so I think that we'll see how it plays out. But I think it now kind of becomes a situation where they really need to add probably if they want to, make a playoffs push. And that's been the whole thing this entire season. So we'll see how it plays out. They have a lot of trade clauses to navigate, a lot of salary constraints, but at the same time, this is a team that started the season 8-1, looked pretty good until the injuries stacked up. So we'll see how it plays out.
I think the point on Dougie Hamilton. I think the point on Dougie Hamilton, which who our friend Steve Weir wrote in his article, is
Steve's
his contract
really
structure. Good. Yeah. So, he pointed out like Dougie Hamilton gets a $7.4 million signing bonus on July 1. After that, he has $1 million salary that season and 5.25 the next year. So after July 1st, he has 6.25 million over the next 2 years. That's either that's attractive then for a team that maybe they're not worried about cap space, but it's more like a cash situation. Like they don't want to spend all the money. I mean, that's very attractive. You can pay the guy, $3 million a year on average with a $9 million cap hit. Or again, this is where he was creative. And I think that, depending on how it's structured and what kind of agreements are in place, but potentially, he goes somewhere, gets that July 1st bonus, and then agrees to terminate his contract because I think Dougie Hamilton is a UFA next summer, or even like if it's later in the fall, he's going to make at least pretty close to 2 times $3 million out there. Right. So
probably more than that, for being honest.
Yeah. So he's not going to end up like behind. So that's an interesting thing to look at, is like whether he gets traded or not after that July 1st bonus. Does he mutually terminate or agree to work out the process to terminate his contract and sign somewhere else? And then that the team that had him is off the hook for the remainder.
Can I ask a quick question? If that were to play out and New Jersey retained on this deal, so they trade Dougie this year to, let's say, Dallas, right? In Steve's example, and they retain 25%, and then he gets his contract terminated after the bonus is paid by Dallas on July 1. Is New Jersey still retaining for those 2 years, or does that like stop their retention as well?
Yeah, that's never happened, so I'd have to check. But in my opinion, that contract is no longer an active contract, so there's no more retention there's no more contract to be retaining on. So to me, that would be gone.
Okay, yeah, no, that's honestly interesting that there's never even been like a precedent for that.
Well, we haven't seen terminations until really like this until recently. Typically, terminations were guys like in the minors that want to be out of their contract and go play in Europe, right? So we haven't really seen terminations like that. But that would be my opinion. Just like if there's a retention on a buyout, that original retention goes away and it's replaced with the like a buyout cap hit based on that retention percentage, but it changes the cap hit from the original retention because that contract has changed. It's now been bought out.
Yeah, and that's why we have this show, so Hart can answer all these interesting, nuanced dynamics. Let us finish up the episode here. It's presented by our friends at CoolBet. Don't forget to go to puckpedia.com/coolbet to get in on the action today. Stay cool and bet responsibly. puckpedia.com/coolbet. We actually have a couple of questions flowing in right now. Let's start with a question we saw on Twitter that has to involve Trevor Zegras, and I'm looking at my other monitor, so sorry for the eye issue. But essentially, Zegras is up at the end of this season, I believe, on a contract. Philly wants to lock that down because Trevor's having a really good year this year. So the question was, if he signs a 1-year deal, he'll be an RFA again. But if he signs a 2-year deal, he'll be a UFA. Is that correct? The person who asked the question, Dean, noted that it's probably a moot point because he probably signs for 5+ years anyway. But I think he wanted to get that understanding of how much longer he is an RFA.
Yeah, so he has 2 more years of RFA eligibility after this year. So he is UFA eligible in 2028. So a 1-year deal if he signs a 1-year deal, it would finish as an RFA. To his point, if he signs a 2-year deal, it would cover 2 RFA seasons and it would end as a UFA.
Okay, perfect. That is helpful. And Seth, our producer, has just sent out a note, not necessarily anything for us to talk about further, but Robert Thomas did just get placed on IR by the St. Louis Blues. He'll be out at minimum a couple weeks. He could be a potential candidate, depending on the Blues situation, to go on LTIR, save some cap space. But if they don't need it, then they're not going to put him there, basically.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. And then we did get a question to one of our fans who's asking about the Oilers. He wanted to know if we could possibly look at the Darnell contract the same way you looked at the Dougie Hamilton contract. Is he another guy who has pretty high bonus structure on his deal? I believe he has 1 more additional year than Dougie does remaining on his contract, but maybe just, he's a guy that Oilers fan base has kind of talked about a ton, just thinking that he's not necessarily worth that large contract that he received.
He's got 4 years left, and after this, and each year has a $6 million signing bonus. So it's not the same as Dougie Hamilton, because it's not like with Dougie Hamilton, we talked about he'll get that bonus, then he doesn't have that much owing on his contract. I guess if Darnell Nurse was traded after July 1st in a season, yeah, then there's he's already been paid the $6 million, but he still has many years left with a lot of money. So basically, he makes a total of $8 million next year, and then the next 3 years, $7.2 million. So unlike Dougie Hamilton, I can't imagine him ever terminating that contract because I don't think he could make it up on another contract. There's too much left on this one. Potentially, and also because of that structure, it's not like it can be bought out because signing bonuses aren't bought out, so the cap hit would make it basically again, you could buy it out, but there'd be very little cap benefit to buying out Darnell Nurse's contract. So I think Nurse is either is going to be playing through the end of that contract. It's just maybe he's traded. He does have a full no move clause and until 27-28. Then he has a 10-team no trade.
Okay, good to know. And yeah, it is interesting with, the buyout doesn't make sense if the contract has heavy signing bonus in it, just because there's not really much cap benefit to that. The final thing is not really a question, but I did, I think we got to talk this out. How about them Sabres? They're 14-2 in their last 16 games. I mean, what a turn of around for this Buffalo Sabres. And they have a big decision to make with Alex Tuck. And I was listening to the What Chaos guys today, and they're basically saying, and I think I agree with this, that even if you don't sign Alex Tuck and you let him walk at the end of the season, but you're making that playoff push and you possibly make it into the playoffs with Alex Tuck, I think that's a win for the Buffalo Sabres. And you just have to, it's not a situation with Mitch Marner where you kind of it would have been better to get some value for him. I think with this, it's let's just try to get in the playoffs and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah, I mean, they need to make the playoffs. Obviously, that would be critical for that market. I would say, though, maybe you trade them if you can also take back a player with term or in a different deal, get a player with term. I think that might be a best of both worlds, right? The question is like
a hockey trade, right? As they say, a quote unquote.
Yeah, or trade Tuck to someone as a rental and use those assets somewhere else to go acquire a player with term. But I agree. I think if they're in the mix, like they can't just subtract Tuck and that's it.
They don't have enough to like withstand that.
That would be hard to do considering again how long it's been since they made the playoffs. I think in a lot of markets you'd say no, you got to take the longer term view. Like St. Louis has done that in the past, right? Like we're not going to win the cup. Who cares if we make the playoffs and get bounced in the first year? That's not the case of Buffalo. I think to your point, they have to make the playoffs if there's an opportunity. But I'm just like looking at the UFAs out there. Like the top scoring ones right now are Panarin, Schmaltz, Ovechkin, Radish, and then Alex Tuck, right? So if he does command $11 million, is that the best way to utilize money? I don't know. And is there someone? And let's say they kept him as kind of their own rental and he walks. Like, is there another play? Like, should you pay that price or should you give that money somewhere else? I just don't know if there's other free agents that like you're better served giving that money to. I think if they don't sign him, you'd hope if you're a Sabres fan that they go on the trade market and go acquire someone and use some of that cap space because I just can't imagine that fans would be very forgiving if next season they don't have Tuck and they have 15 million in cap space.
Yeah, July 1st is not going to be as fun as other years this year, but maybe we get some more action kind of mid-July with the trade market. Like you mentioned, not a lot of guys on the free agency market, but there could be a lot of guys available through trades. And so maybe we see some more action there in the off season. But cool. That is all the time we have for you guys today. Good episode. A lot of good stuff we got through. Don't forget to subscribe to the PuckPedia YouTube page. Obviously, follow along on X. Hart, set your notifications on, both on PuckPedia's website and on Twitter. We got some new site features coming up, hopefully in the next few weeks that we're excited about on PuckPedia. Make sure you're going to the site every day, checking out all the good stuff, salary cap, trades, waivers, game lineups, rosters, everything going on PuckPedia's website. Hart, any final words?
No, I'm hoping that we see some action here before the Olympics and then looking forward to some Olympic action pretty soon.
PuckPedia.com